So hello, welcome to the video and welcome once again to Heathrow Terminal 5. Oh no, I hear you cry, not another BA video. Yes, this is going to be another BA Club class video, although I've tried hard to layer 3 extra layers of interest onto this video. The first is that I'm flying on BA's old Club World seats. I call them the Club Dormitory, others call them the Yin Yang seat. They were great in their time, but are they still great today? The second layer is that I've booked to fly on one of BA's inaugural flights. I'm flying today down to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, and BA serviced Jeddah years and years ago, well before the you-know-what, and today was supposed to be their first flight back, a re-inaugural perhaps, rather than an inaugural, and I was expecting there to be a bit of a hoopla, some balloons, maybe even some cake. But imagine my dismay when this morning I had a look on Flight Radar just to check that everything was in order for today's flight, only to discover that they actually started flying to Jeddah 2 days ago. So today will be the third flight. I then double-checked all of the press releases that came out back in March, I think it was, when this service was announced, and all of them said Monday the 4th of November, which is today. So at some point after announcing it, they moved it back by 2 days, which is very peculiar, because I looked 2, maybe 3 weeks ago to see if you could still get a redemption seat on today's flight, and you could, and it was still the first flight that was operating. So perhaps at some point today I'll find someone who knows what actually happened, because if it's not actually going to be an inaugural, I'll be a bit annoyed. And as one of my patrons very amusingly said, I'll need to bring my own balloons. And of course the third layer of interest is flying to Saudi Arabia. That will be a new country for me, a place I've wanted to go for decades, but only recently have I really been able to, simply as a tourist. It starts off, I believe, as a normal flight with an alcohol service, and then at some point it turns into a dry flight. It's an overnight flight, so I think the point where it goes dry will be when we're all asleep, so we won't really notice, but I'm quite looking forward to seeing quite how BA handles this. And then of course there's the entry and the immigration into Saudi Arabia, which I'm quite looking forward to sharing with you. So if none of that sounds even remotely interesting, toodaloo, see you later. But if you'd like to see what actually happens, stick around. Hi, I'm Matt and this is Matt's Planet. I aim to entertain, educate and inspire with my travel adventures from planning to execution. I'll show you how you can travel in style for a lot less than you'd think. So subscribe so you can come with me. I was travelling in business class, but my gold status with BA, equivalent to Emerald in one world, allowed me to use the first wing to check in. And I hadn't been able to check in online. These days it is possible for most people with many passports to just show up at the Saudi border and get in. But there can be wrinkles if, for example, your passport reveals that you were born in Israel. So BA still has to check everyone's documents before you can check in. BA is on the hook if they deliver you to Saudi and you can't then get in. I'd actually applied for a Saudi visa for reasons I'll explain later, so check-in was a painless process. I mentioned the inaugural switcheroo to the lovely agent, but predictably she didn't know anything about it, although she did very amusingly suggest I get some cake in the lounge. The first wing security was as smooth and efficient as ever, and I was quickly through. I always find walking along this corridor to be a bit like walking into a sci-fi movie. And halfway down I started to worry that my old mate Neddy had been retired to pasture, but nope, he was still there, albeit in a slightly more discreet position. I've featured this lounge many times before, so I won't linger on it here. It was busy, but by no means rammed, and I got a seat in, or should that be on, the balcony, which is my favourite part of the lounge. Cheers! The comments section has trained me to hold the champagne flute by the stem. A few points of interest in the dining area. I think this was still celebrating Diwali, and I also noticed a new food station offering pulled pork sandwiches, and I couldn't resist. It was okay, but I can't report that I rushed back for a second one. I was on a 7:25 departure in the evening, so BA was promising a full dinner, unlike it now does on flights departing after 9 PM, so I didn't eat much in the lounge, although I made sure I got my slice of cake. Here's to BA's return to Jeddah. 3 gates that evening, and gate B48 to be specific, one of those in the corner that involves an impossibly long boarding finger. Jeddah is the gateway to Saudi Arabia's holy sites, so lots of my fellow passengers were pilgrims, probably embarking on the Umrah, so were already sporting their pilgrimage robes. Eventually we reached the plane. It really is a comically long boarding finger, and the plane we eventually reached was an 11-year-old Boeing 787, one of the smallest 8 series planes, and one that has not yet had its turn to be refurbished with the new Club Suite product. The inaugural flight had been on a 787-9, which does have the new suites as well as a first-class cabin, but after that initial flight the route had been operated with these older planes, perhaps an indication of how BA expects the route to perform. 2 rows of club seating behind the galley and 3 rows in front of it, but as this seating is 2-3-2, that's 35 business seats in total. I was in seat 3A, very carefully selected, as it's one of the 3 seats in this 21-seat mini cabin where getting in and out of the seat doesn't rely on the cooperation of your neighbour, you're not bothered by anyone else's movements, and you have something resembling privacy when seated. 3 seats in row 3 enjoy this privilege. The other 4 window seats and the 2 middle seat occupants have to climb over their neighbours' legs for access. And 8 of the aisle seat occupants have to be climbed over by those passengers who are trapped inside their seats. The remaining 4 seats are aisle seats who will be unbothered by their neighbours, although their seat is comically exposed to the aisle, so is really not desirable even if you're not going to get trampled on by a clumsy neighbour. Remember, this seat was revolutionary, world-leading and stunningly innovative when it launched 25 years ago. It is truly amazing how quickly things change in the world of airline seating. But if you can snag one of these 2 perfect seats, that middle one is a bit odd, then this seat is actually quite good. By no means perfect, but if, like me, you're a bit taller, you really can make it work. Another weird design feature is that when this divider is down, you are face to face with your neighbour and indeed with anyone across the aisle. Which is fine if you know those people, but it's rather uncomfortable if you don't. Although it only needs to be down for the safety briefing. You can whack it straight back up for the rest of the flight, including takeoff and landing. As Michael Caine once said, not a lot of people know that. The crew may lower it to facilitate the service, but they also may not. Fortunately, this seat was empty for this flight. You can also just about see through the screen too, although it is pretty much an opaque barrier. The footrest drops down and forms part of the bed, but it won't be of much assistance to your comfort when the seat is upright if you're short or even of regular height. And here again is your exit route to the aisle. It's snug, but I wouldn't worry too much if you're of larger dimensions. Down low are plugs and your storage, and that's it. The first few flights I took in this seat, I put my shoes in here, but don't. Put them in the overhead bins, which you can readily access from this seat, remember. The drawer is actually quite spacious for your bits and bobs. It's inconveniently located, and it's impossible to access when in bed mode, but when seated, it's really not terrible. The screen pops out thusly, and is old, so is small with very poor definition. Many of the screens in the layout seem to struggle to stay in the deployed position too. Beneath this is the table, which I only managed to film at the end of the flight, so stay tuned. Up the head end of the seat, and there's not a lot to report. There's decent width at the shoulder, and to your side is a headphone socket, a remote control, and a reading light. Although as you'll see, this is about all the light you'll get in the seat if the crew decides to lower the main cabin lights. A pre-departure beverage was offered, champagne or juice. Hey, we're not in Saudi yet. Cheers! Boarding completed, the boarding finger retracted and the safety video played. It's now a sort of Bridgerton Downton Abbey mashup, some of which was filmed at Highclere Castle where Downton was set. I can't say I got all of the references and it did go on a bit, but I suppose it's something different, certainly something British. And up into a clear autumnal London evening. This seat faces backwards, so there is a slightly odd sensation when you accelerate, and it's also odd for a moment or two when you brake on landing, but for 99% of the flight you really don't know that you're travelling backwards. I tried to deploy the screen as we were still climbing, and you can see that gravity was still in full effect. When you've reclined the seat a little, provided you are tall and have decent foot dexterity, you can deploy the footrest and use it. You'll note the cabin lights were already off, and I was working from the reading light over my shoulder. The lights went off for takeoff, which is entirely normal, and they didn't come back on again until we were preparing to land. No overhead vents either, some air conditioning from this vent, but apart from some gentle mood lighting, the only light you get is from behind you. It does, however, give you plenty of opportunity to work on your shadow puppetry. A hot, damp rag was distributed after takeoff, which isn't always the case, but it did what you'd expect. Menus had been distributed before takeoff. I'm still annoyed there's no cognac, but the food actually looked pretty appealing, and unusually, I really had to have a good think about what I was going to order. I'm sorry to bang on about the cabin lighting, but I found it really quite annoying that the service was conducted in the dark. This was barely 8 PM, and I doubt anyone was expecting to go straight off to sleep after takeoff. I don't always film the loos these days, but I don't think I've shown a BA 787 loo before. Not a lot of embellishments for a business cabin, but it had everything you needed. On the way back to the seat, I stuck my head into that weird middle seat that is the third that you can access without climbing over anyone. I've never flown in it, and no one picked it on this flight, but it would be really weird to be stuck in the middle like that with those odd privacy screens on both sides. The amenity kit is White Company branded, a smallish case but eminently reusable. It contained the essentials: an eye mask, socks, dental kit, 2 lotions and a lip balm, plus ear bungs. Better than some, not as good as others. Service started with a drinks round, a gin and tonic for me and some nuts. BA does a lot well, but there are a few things it does which suggests they're really not paying attention. Not decanting these into a ramekin for the business cabin is just daft. Indeed, it's probably cheaper to buy a jumbo tub of mixed nuts and scoop them into ramekins for this service. We all know how much BA enjoys saving money. The way they actually do it just looks cheap, uses up a lot of packaging and creates waste. Once we'd levelled off and the screen kind of stayed in place, I was able to check out the entertainment options. The screen is low quality, but the content offered was decent. Quite a few good options, I thought. About 130 movies in total if I recall correctly, and as a British airline most of them were Western cinema. The 787 is a good airplane. It's made of new materials, so it's fuel efficient and can maintain a lower pressurisation, so you feel fresher getting off. But I actively avoid flying on them, as I hate the windows. I'll talk about this more in other videos as this trip goes on, but the crew often locks the windows into dark mode even on daytime flights and won't give you back control over your own window, which really annoys me. This flight took place entirely at night. They didn't lock them, but I dislike this feature so much I will avoid the 787 entirely if there is another alternative. So I started with the smoked salmon roulette roll, and it was spectacular, really good. Served with a salad, another salad, and a slightly weird 3-in-1 bread roll thing. And I'm thrilled to report that BA provides ample cutlery for the meal and, unlike Virgin Atlantic, doesn't expect you to recycle your knife 3 times during the meal. You can almost forgive their laziness in not decanting those nuts. Almost. Delicious, om nom nom as they say, even if that bread is a bit weird. Washed down with the Spanish red wine. I might be getting repetitive here, but that again is the only light you have to eat by. Between courses I had an opportunity to investigate how BA actually serves the meals. It's a tray service, so the whole setting is delivered on this cheap, relatively flimsy plastic tray rather than being laid out item by item as most airlines do. As with the nuts, what they serve you is really quite good. How they serve it just feels cheap. For the main I chose the chicken. I was a little cautious as I don't love truffle when it's added by the kilo, but it was elegantly incorporated into the dish, and the whole thing again was excellent. BA's Heathrow catering comes from Doe & Co, who have a reputation for excellence, and BA's meals from that airport have been consistently good in my experience. Having said that, the bread really was a bit weird, otherwise I'd have used it to mop up that sauce. Om nom 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 nom, as they say. I've not got a sweet tooth, but I make an exception for sticky toffee pudding. Again, it was really good, and I did something I've never done before by popping into the galley to compliment the team on the meal. It was one of the best I've ever had on a plane, streets ahead of what Virgin currently offers. Just saying. After the meal I needed some exercise. They hadn't barricaded us into the business cabin, which is another way of saying that they hadn't barricaded everyone else out, and economy was pretty busy with a 333 layout. Quite a few pilgrims, and they still had their cabin lights on. Premium economy only has 3.5 rows and again was quite busy. A 232 layout here, which is actually the same as the business cabin. The 2-row business cabin behind the galley was virtually empty, which gave me the opportunity to show quite how exposed these aisle seats really are. In the dark, of course, but my editing software can compensate. They really are exposed. I've only ever flown in one once, on an overnight flight, and it offers you the same sleeping experience, but when you are asleep you do sense every movement past you in the aisle. The bedding was on the seat on boarding, but I'd thrown it into the overhead bin before filming. It's made up of a thin mattress topper and a thicker duvet. No sleep suits in business on BA, one of the few areas where Virgin wins. With the footrest down, the seat converts into a flat bed quite easily. Given where the button is, you probably need to do this whilst in the seat. It would be a bit of a stretch from the aisle. Remember, access to the plugs and the storage drawer will end when the seat is converted. This seat was revolutionary 25 years ago, remember. I shimmied back out of the seat, and here's how it looks with the mattress topper in place. I'm 6'4", 1m93, and had no trouble lying flat. And unlike those aisle seats, the privacy here is excellent. As for storage, my camera has a clip, and I was able to attach it to that partition frame and could hook my glasses and hearing aids onto it while I slept, which actually worked out quite well, but it is a real pain if you need to store stuff while you sleep, as there is literally nowhere to put anything when you're in bed mode. We were only in the air for 5 hours and 40 minutes that night, so there really wasn't much time for sleep, but I grabbed a couple of hours of good rest and woke as we were crossing the Egyptian coast. On flights to Saudi, I believe the alcohol is locked away when the plane enters Saudi airspace, but it wasn't an issue on this flight as we were only over Saudi for the last 10 minutes before landing, and when we entered their airspace it was 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't know whether I slept through the offer of breakfast or whether the length of flight made it more of an on-request sort of arrangement, but I did manage to snag a cup of tea as they prepared the cabin for landing, and here's proof the windows remained unlocked all night. Still no cabin lighting though, until it came back on about 20 minutes before landing, which allows me to demonstrate the tray table as promised. Comes down, flips over, moves back and forth, the usual stuff. It's quite sturdy actually, although there's no chance of exiting the seat when it's fully deployed. The nimble and the thin-thighed may manage it when it's half deployed. The lights went back off again for landing, and we got a good view of the city as we came in for a pre-dawn arrival, and down into Saudi Arabia. Currently there's 3 ways of getting into Saudi for non-Muslims. Friends on the ground suggest that the visa regime is shortly to be overhauled and made simpler and cheaper, so hopefully this will be out of date when you watch this. I applied for a multi-entry visitor visa, which can only be obtained in advance and costs around 395 Saudi Riyals, which is £85 or 107 US dollars. Mine was approved and granted in 3 minutes and is valid for 12 months. I had routed my flights back home through Saudi. Although I'd planned to stay airside, I liked having the ability to go landside if I needed. Plus, an upcoming trip might also pass through Saudi, so obtaining a multi-entry visa made sense for me. particularly as option 2, which is getting a visa on arrival, costs exactly the same, and from what I read, it's up to the officer processing you as to whether they give you a single or multiple entry visa. The third option is to obtain a visa waiver, where you validate that you don't need a visa to enter. Although as that has to be done in advance, still costs 150 Saudi Riyals and only covers a single entry into the kingdom, the visa waiver process looks and feels a lot like actually getting a regular visa, albeit it is a fair bit cheaper. A fourth option is a transit visa, which must be applied for in advance, costs a tenth of the other visas, but only allows for 96 hours on the ground. But I believe this can only be obtained in conjunction with flying on a Saudi airline. We pulled up to the terminal, although the heat and humidity, it was over 90 degrees with 50% humidity when I was in Jeddah, didn't do any favours to the view out of the window. Off and into Terminal 1, which opened in 2019 and is one of the largest terminals in the whole world. And it is a large terminal. If you're on the fence about getting assistance through Jeddah, take it. It was an 8-minute briskish walk for me to get to the train, and then a 3-minute train ride and another 2-minute walk to get to the immigration desks. When I got there, entering Saudi was very straightforward. The female officer didn't need to see my visa as it was all stored on her computer. It took a few minutes to capture all 10 of my fingerprints and a photo, and I was stamped in without fuss. No questions were asked, as really should be the case when you've already gone through a visa application process. And I was into Saudi Arabia to be met with the pre-dawn call to prayer. I had no checked bags to collect, but all passenger bags were scanned at the exit. I believe this is the check for illicit goods, such as duty-free bottles of Jack Daniels. It's not worth taking the risk, would be my advice. I'll make a video about my time in Saudi Arabia, which was fascinating, welcoming, and not at all what I expected. So let me sum up the flight. I was annoyed it wasn't an inaugural. I've written to BA's media team to ask what happened, but after 6 days they haven't bothered to respond, which is annoying to say the least. The flight was great, very good food and drink, a few niggles about the way the food is delivered, but that's all trivial. I had a great crew and we were on time, so no complaints there. And the seat I had was pretty good. There's big issues with storage and with the entertainment screen, but that specific seat has great privacy and a sizable flat bed, which is unencumbered by a foot coffin, which for the larger traveller makes it excellent for sleeping. But there's only 4 seats out of the 35 that are that great. The 2 window seats at the rear of the 2 mini cabins. The other 31 seats are really quite awful. BA now expects to refit all of their Heathrow aircraft with the new club suite by the end of 2026. So these seats will become increasingly rare if you're travelling from that airport. But no plans have been announced to refit the fleet of 10 or so wide-body aircraft based at Gatwick, which suggests that those planes will be equipped with this seat for many years to come. So thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. Give the video a like if you did. Hey, give it a like if you didn't. Please subscribe if you're new and leave me a comment. What do you think of these old seats? Check out my Patreon account if you'd like to join a community of like-minded Dromo maniacs. And I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Thank you.